My mother announced on my birthday that she'd sold my grandmother's ring for my sister's business school. I wished them well, but it was all an act. That ring was evidence of fraud, and they had just walked right into the legal trap my grandmother had set for them. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The chintzy, electronic melody of Happy Birthday from my phone speaker felt less like a celebration and more like a dirge. I let it play out, staring at the single, sad-looking cupcake on my kitchen counter. 30 years old. It felt like a milestone that should be marked with champagne and laughter, not with the profound, hollow silence of my small apartment and a call from a mother who hadn't spoken to me in 3 weeks. When the song finally ended, her voice crackled through the line, devoid of any genuine warmth. "Jessica, darling, happy birthday." "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice flat. I poked the frosting on the cupcake with my finger. "Listen, I know we haven't had a chance to connect," Brenda began, her tone already shifting into the smooth, practical cadence she used when she was about to deliver bad news disguised as a sensible decision. It was the same tone she'd used when she told me my childhood dog had to be rehomed, or when she explained why my college fund had been reallocated to my sister Tiffany's private high school tuition. Things have been just manic over here. Tiffany's acceptance into the Warrington business program has us all in a tizzy. It's a tremendous opportunity. "I'm sure it is," I said, my throat tightening. I knew this wasn't a call to wish me well. It was a call to manage my expectations, to lay the groundwork for a demand. "It is," she affirmed, a note of pride sharpening her voice. "But it's frightfully expensive, as you can imagine. Your father and I have crunched the numbers, and even with our contributions, there was a significant shortfall." I waited, the silence stretching between us. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, arranging the words just so. This was her art form, the gentle, reasonable explanation for an act of profound selfishness. "We had to make a difficult decision for the good of the family," she said finally. "We needed to liquidate an asset, your grandmother Beatrice's sapphire ring. We had to sell it." The air left my lungs in a silent rush. The world seemed to tilt, the cheerful yellow of my kitchen walls suddenly feeling oppressive and sickly. Grandma Beatrice's ring. It wasn't the most valuable piece she owned, not by a long shot, but it was the one that was intrinsically hers. A deep, velvety blue sapphire flanked by 2 small diamonds, set in a simple gold band worn smooth with age. It was the ring she'd worn every single day, the one her hand was never without. The one she'd promised to me when I was just a girl, fascinated by the way the stone seemed to hold its own secret light. "We got a very good price for it," Brenda continued, oblivious or indifferent to the blow she had just landed. "It more than covers Tiffany's first year of tuition and her living expenses. I know how much you loved it, but you understand, don't you? Tiffany's future is on the line. It's a sacrifice we all have to make." A sacrifice we have to make. The pronoun was doing a lot of heavy lifting. I hadn't been consulted. I hadn't been informed. I was simply being told, on my 30th birthday, that a piece of my heart had been pawned off for my sister's ambition. A strange, icy calm washed over me, pushing back the initial wave of grief. It was the calm of certainty. My mother, in her arrogance, had made a critical error. She believed she was in control. She believed the will she had seen, the one that split everything down the middle, was the final word. She believed she was liquidating a family asset. But she was wrong. I took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing my voice to be even. "Wow, okay. Well, if it's for Tiffany's future, then of course. Please tell her I wish her all the best. I hope it's everything she's ever wanted." There was a pause, a flicker of surprise in the silence. She had expected tears, arguments, accusations. My calm compliance seemed to wrong-foot her. "Oh," she said. "Well, that's very mature of you, Jessica. I knew you'd understand. It really is for the best." "Of course," I repeated, my voice now a silken whisper. "For the best." We exchanged a few more meaningless pleasantries before she hung up, no doubt feeling smug and successful. I slowly lowered the phone, my hand steady. The cupcake sat on the counter, its single candle unlit. My birthday gift from my mother was a theft wrapped in a lie, a casual gutting of a memory she assumed I was too weak to defend. But my grandmother, Beatrice, had known her daughter well. She had known Brenda's casual cruelty, her blatant favoritism, her grasping nature. And she had spent years preparing for this exact moment. The ring wasn't just a ring, it was evidence, and my mother had just confessed to selling it. The cruelty wasn't in selling the ring. It was in thinking I was foolish enough not to know its true owner. After the call ended, I didn't move for a long time. The silence in my apartment was absolute, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. The grief was real and sharp, a physical ache in my chest for the loss of the ring itself. I pictured it so clearly. The way the sapphire shifted from cornflower to midnight depending on the light, the worn softness of the gold band against my grandmother's skin. It was a tangible link to her, and now it was gone, sold to some stranger to fund Tiffany's latest whim. But beneath the grief, a different feeling was crystallizing. It was cold, hard, and sharp-edged. It was the feeling of resolve. My mother and sister had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness for the last time. They saw me as the sensible one, the responsible one, which in our family's twisted lexicon meant the one who was expected to perpetually give things up for Tiffany. They had no idea that Grandma Beatrice had spent years nurturing a different side of me. The observant, methodical side that now defined my career as a forensic archivist. I finally pushed away from the counter and walked into my small home office. On the wall hung a single, beautifully framed photo of Grandma Beatrice and me. We were in her garden, laughing, her hand resting on my shoulder. The sapphire ring was clearly visible on her finger. I looked at her smiling face, at the knowing glint in her eyes, and felt a surge of connection, of shared purpose. "They did it, Grandma," I whispered to the photograph. "Just like you said they would." My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Tiffany. "Mom told me she spoke to you. THX so much for being so cool about the ring. Means the world. This program is literally my dream. You're the best sister ever. Zoxa." The casual, breezy entitlement of it was breathtaking. The abbreviation THX. The cloying Zoxo. She wasn't thanking me for a sacrifice. She was treating me like a bank teller who had just approved her withdrawal. She felt entitled to my inheritance, to my sentiment, to my very memories. I typed back a simple reply, my fingers steady. "Of course, good luck with everything." Sending it felt like setting a chess piece. Let them believe I was compliant. Let them bask in their victory. Their arrogance was the most crucial element of the trap Beatrice had so carefully constructed. I sat down at my desk and unlocked my laptop. I didn't need to look at any documents. I had them all memorized. The memory of the day Mr. Arthur Vance, my grandmother's lawyer, had called me to his office a week after her funeral was seared into my brain. My mother and Tiffany had already been talking about managing the estate, their voices full of feigned sorrow and barely concealed avarice. They assumed everything would be processed according to the will my grandfather had drawn up decades ago. A simple 50-50 split between his two granddaughters, to be managed by Brenda until we were of age. But in Mr. Vance's quiet, wood-paneled office, he had slid a thick, sealed envelope across the desk. "Your grandmother was a very shrewd woman, Jessica," he had said, his expression somber but firm. "She made some updated provisions in the last years of her life. She asked that I give this to you, and only you, and that we wait to execute it until you felt the time was right." Inside was a new, ironclad will, signed and notarized less than a year before her passing. It revoked all previous versions. It named me, Jessica, as the sole beneficiary of her entire estate. The house, the stocks, the savings, the jewelry, every last photograph and teacup, it was all mine. My mother was mentioned only once, in a clause that explicitly and pointedly disinherited her. Tiffany was not mentioned at all. There was also a handwritten letter from Beatrice. Her familiar, elegant script filled 3 pages. She wrote of her love for me, but also of her deep, abiding disappointment in her own daughter. She had seen Brenda's greed, her willingness to sacrifice my well-being for Tiffany's benefit, time and time again. "She will not stop," Beatrice had written. "When I am gone, she will try to take what is yours. Do not let her. She believes she is clever, but she is merely predictable. Let her show her true colors. The truth, my darling Jessica, is the only weapon you will ever need." That letter was my shield and my sword. And now, my mother had handed me the final piece of evidence I needed to wield it. The fraudulent sale of that ring wasn't just a betrayal. It was a felony. I stared at the picture on my wall, a fierce, protective love for my grandmother swelling in my heart. They had forgotten the most important thing, the one detail that would be their undoing. They always underestimated me, but more importantly, they underestimated Grandma Beatrice. My grandmother Beatrice was a woman built of quiet strength and meticulous habits. While my mother, Brenda, chased the fluctuating highs of the real estate market, building a career on commission checks and the art of the sale, Beatrice cultivated her garden and her library. She taught me not with lectures, but with actions. She showed me how to press flowers, how to label them with their Latin names, and how to archive them in heavy books. "Everything has a story, Jessica," she would say, her fingers gently tracing the delicate, paper-thin petals. "And if you don't preserve it carefully, the story gets lost." That was our world, a world of patience, detail, and history. It was a world my mother and sister had no interest in. For them, Beatrice's house was just the property, a future asset. Her possessions were inventory. While I was learning to identify the maker's mark on a piece of silver, Tiffany was learning how to command attention, a skill my mother praised as executive presence. While I was happily lost in the dusty, sunlit attic, cataloging old family letters, Tiffany was at expensive camps for horseback riding or tennis, building a resume for a life I couldn't even imagine. Brenda's favoritism was a constant, corrosive element of my childhood. It wasn't loud or abusive, it was far more insidious. It was in the way she'd listen with rapt attention to Tiffany's dramatic retelling of her day, then cut me off mid-sentence with a dismissive, "Yes, dear, that's nice." It was in the reallocation of funds, always away from my needs and towards Tiffany's wants. Brenda was a retired real estate agent, and she viewed her children through the same lens she viewed properties. Tiffany was a beachfront mansion with curb appeal and endless potential. I was a sturdy, sensible brick house in a quiet neighborhood, reliable, but unexciting and certainly not worth the same investment. Her appearance reflected this philosophy. Now in her late 50s, Brenda was impeccably maintained. Her hair was always perfectly coiffed, her clothes expensive and tailored, her smile a polished veneer that rarely reached her eyes. She spoke with a practiced confidence, her words designed to showcase her intelligence and control. But I knew what lay beneath. I had seen the flash of envy in her eyes when Beatrice praised my patience or my sharp eye. My quiet bond with my grandmother was something Brenda could never have, and therefore, something she resented. Tiffany, at 24, was a younger, more brazen version of her mother. Where Brenda was calculating, Tiffany was simply entitled. She moved through the world with the unshakable confidence of someone who has never had a door closed in her face. Her life was a curated collection of social media posts showcasing a lifestyle she didn't actually fund. She talked incessantly about her personal brand and the revolutionary business she was going to launch, though the details were always vague, couched in buzzwords she'd picked up from podcasts. She had her mother's looks but lacked her subtlety. Her disdain for me was more overt, a mix of pity and annoyance. To her, I was the boring, older sister, a permanent fixture in the background of her much more interesting life. I remember one afternoon, years ago, sitting with Beatrice on her porch swing. I was upset about some fresh injustice. Brenda had promised to help me pay for a history program abroad, only to announce she was using the money to buy Tiffany a car for her 17th birthday instead. Beatrice listened patiently, her gaze fixed on the hummingbirds darting around her feeders. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes. She simply said, "Your mother values things that glitter. Your sister has learned to glitter. But you, my Jessica, you value things that endure. Gold can be melted down, but a foundation of stone lasts forever. Never forget what you are made of." That conversation, more than any other, had become my anchor. They thought I was made of soft earth, easily molded and pushed aside. They were about to discover I was made of stone. The sale of the ring was not just an act of greed, it was a fundamental miscalculation of my character, a mistake born from years of willful ignorance. They had never bothered to look past the quiet surface, and now they would finally see the foundation that Beatrice had so lovingly helped me build. The day after my birthday, the fog of grief and shock had burned away, leaving behind the stark, clear light of purpose. I went to the secure deposit box I rented, a place my mother didn't know existed, and retrieved the thick envelope from Mr. Vance. Back in the quiet of my office, I laid out the contents on my desk: the certified copy of the final will and the handwritten letter Fr. Grandma Beatrice. Reading her words again was like pouring steel into my spine. "She will move quickly," Beatrice wrote. "Her greed is impatient. She will see my home and my savings as her personal bank, and Tiffany will be her justification. Do not confront her with anger. Confront her with facts. An archivist's best tool is an undeniable document." This was my turning point. The shift from passive victim to active strategist was as clean and decisive as turning a page. My entire professional life was about building narratives from evidence, about piecing together the truth from scattered, often hidden, fragments. My mother and sister had just created a brand new archive of their own deceit, and I was uniquely qualified to curate it. My first call was to Mr. Arthur Vance. "Jessica," he said, his voice calm and professional, "I must admit, I have been expecting your call." "They did it, Mr. Vance," I said, my voice low and steady. "My mother informed me yesterday that she has sold my grandmother's sapphire ring to pay for Tiffany's tuition." There was a pause, followed by a quiet sigh. "I am sorry to hear that, both for the sentimental loss and for the confirmation of what Beatrice feared. However, from a legal standpoint, this is a gift. Your mother has just committed felony-level fraudulent conversion of an asset. She has, in no uncertain terms, handed us the key." "What are our next steps?" I asked, feeling a surge of energy. This was my element: a problem, a goal, and a methodology. "First, we do nothing to alert them," Mr. Vance instructed. "We let them enroll Tiffany in her program. We let them spend the money. Every dollar they spend from that sale deepens the hole they are digging. In the meantime, we gather our evidence. The most critical piece is to locate the ring and document its sale." This was where my own skills came into play. Brenda, for all her talk of being a savvy real estate professional, had a predictable taste for luxury. She frequented a small, specific circuit of high-end consignment shops and jewelers in the city, places that prided themselves on their discretion, but also on their meticulous record-keeping. She would have gone somewhere she trusted, somewhere she felt important. I spent the next week engaged in what felt like a quiet, methodical hunt. I didn't go in asking about a stolen ring. I went in as a professional. I created a plausible pretext. I was an archivist working for a private collector, tasked with authenticating the provenance of several estate pieces that had recently come onto the market. I focused on pieces from a certain era, subtly guiding the conversation toward jewelry like my grandmother's. At the third shop, a plush, hushed boutique named The Gilded Cage, I hit pay dirt. The owner, a refined man named Mr. Abernathy, listened intently as I described the sapphire ring. "Ah, yes," he said, his eyes lighting up with recognition. "A beautiful piece, a classic setting. It came in about 2 weeks ago. A woman named Brenda. She said it was a family piece they no longer had a use for." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my expression neutral, professional. "Indeed, we believe it may be part of a collection we are tracking. For our clients' records, would it be possible to see the intake paperwork? We need to confirm the seller and the date of sale." He hesitated, citing client confidentiality. This was the moment I had prepared for. I produced a carefully drafted letter on a fictional letterhead for the Lancaster Historical Foundation, co-signed by a curator whose name I'd invented, requesting his cooperation in a matter of historical verification. It was just official sounding enough. His hesitation wavered. She was quite insistent on a quick cash sale, he mused, more to himself than to me. A little unusual for a piece of that quality. He disappeared into a back office. Minutes later, he returned with a slim file, and there it was. A high-resolution photo of the ring, the date of the sale, and at the bottom, my mother's clear, confident signature on a document attesting that she was the legal owner of the property being sold. I felt a jolt, a mixture of triumph and disgust. Would it be possible to get a certified copy of this document for our records? I asked, my voice betraying no emotion. And perhaps a sworn affidavit from you confirming the details of the transaction. Mr. Vance had prepared me for this. He had explained that a formal legal request might be necessary, but my professional guise might be enough to secure voluntary cooperation. Mr. Abernathy, intrigued by the historical angle and perhaps sensing the legitimacy of my quiet persistence, agreed. I walked out of the gilded cage an hour later with a sealed envelope containing the foundational proof of my mother's crime. She thought she was clever, that a cash sale would leave no trace. But she wasn't an archivist. She didn't understand that everything leaves a trace. Every signature, every transaction, every lie, it all becomes part of the permanent record. With the affidavit from the jeweler secured, the first phase of my plan was complete. Mr. Vance was pleased. "This is perfect, Jessica," he'd said over the phone. "The signature on the sworn bill of sale is undeniable. We now have her cold." The next step, he advised, was to introduce the first crack in my mother's armor of confidence. We needed to let her know that I was asking questions, but without revealing how much I already knew. The opportunity presented itself perfectly. Brenda, in her infinite magnanimity, called to invite me to a celebratory family lunch. It was her way of parading her success, of demonstrating to me how wonderfully things had turned out thanks to our collective sacrifice. Tiffany would be there, no doubt glowing with the thrill of her impending academic career, all funded by a crime. "Just the three of us," Brenda had trilled over the phone. "A chance to properly celebrate Tiffany and for me to thank you again for being so understanding, darling. La Perla, Saturday at 1. La Perla was one of her favorites, expensive, ostentatious, and designed to make a statement. It was the perfect stage. I arrived precisely at 1, dressed in a simple but elegant navy dress. I looked calm, perhaps even a little subdued, playing the part of the dutiful, ever-sacrificing daughter they expected me to be. Brenda and Tiffany were already seated at a prime table, sipping sparkling water. Brenda looked radiant in a cream-colored suit, the very picture of a proud matriarch. Tiffany was scrolling through her phone, a small, smug smile on her face. "Jessica, there you are," Brenda chirped, air-kissing the space beside my cheek. "Hi, Mom, Tiffany," I said, taking my seat. The initial chatter was exactly as I'd expected. It revolved entirely around Tiffany, the orientation schedule for business school, the ridiculously expensive list of required textbooks, the search for a suitable apartment near the campus. I listened patiently, nodding at the appropriate moments, offering noncommittal affirmations. I was a spectator at the Tiffany show, a role I had played my entire life. Finally, after we had placed our orders, I saw my opening. I turned to my mother, my expression one of innocent curiosity. "Mom, I was thinking about Grandma Beatrice's ring the other day," I began, my voice soft. "It was such a beautiful piece. I know it's gone, but just for my own peace of mind. I was thinking about updating the insurance rider on the few other small things I have from her. Do you remember which jeweler you sold it to? It would help my agent to know the kind of valuation it received." The question, so practical and calmly delivered, hung in the air. I watched my mother's face. The polished smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. A flicker of something, annoyance, panic, crossed her eyes before being expertly suppressed. "Oh, darling, you don't need to worry about that," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "It wasn't a traditional jeweler, it was a private arrangement." "A private collector," Tiffany chimed in quickly, a little too quickly. She glanced at her mother, a silent, panicked exchange passing between them. Mom has connections from her real estate days. It was all very discreet. I pressed gently. "A private collector? That's interesting. Do they have a name? I'm just trying to be thorough with my paperwork. Provenance, you know." I used the word deliberately, a subtle nod to my own profession. Brenda's jaw tightened. "Jessica, it's really not important. It was a private cash transaction. The man was an investor. There is no paper trail to follow. The matter is finished." Her tone was clipped, a clear warning to drop the subject. I leaned back in my chair, my gaze holding hers. "No paper trail, that seems risky for a piece of that significance." "Why does it even matter?" Tiffany snapped, her voice sharp with irritation. She put her phone down on the table with a clatter. "It's done. The money is in my tuition account. Why are you suddenly so obsessed with this?" I didn't answer her. I just looked at my mother and gave a small, thoughtful nod. "You're right. It's done," I said quietly. I let the silence sit for a moment before picking up my menu and changing the subject. "So, this truffle pasta sounds amazing, doesn't it?" But the damage was done. The air at the table had shifted. My mother and sister exchanged another uneasy look. My calm, reasonable questions had unnerved them. They had expected me to be emotional or silent. They hadn't expected me to be practical. They had lied, and they knew that I knew they had lied. The first crack in their facade had appeared. It was small, but it was there. And I knew that from this moment on, every conversation, every interaction would be shadowed by the lie they had just told. They were no longer celebrating a victory. They were defending a position, and it was only a matter of time before it crumbled. The lie at lunch festered. I could feel it in the way my mother's subsequent texts became overly cheerful, peppered with inquiries about my work and my well-being, a transparent attempt to gauge my mood and pretend everything was normal. Tiffany went silent, which was, in its own way, just as telling. The seed of doubt I had planted was growing. They knew something was amiss, but they had no idea of the depth of my knowledge. Meanwhile, Mr. Vance and I were solidifying our case. The affidavit from the jeweler was our cornerstone. Now, we needed to document the other side of the crime, the spending. Mr. Vance engaged a discreet forensic accountant who, with Tiffany's public university records and some educated guesswork, was able to create a detailed projection of the costs she was incurring. Tuition payments, housing deposits, and other major expenses that were clearly being funded by a recent, large influx of cash. Every withdrawal was another nail. My own investigation bore fruit as well. Remembering my grandmother's meticulous nature, I spent a weekend in the attic of her house. A house, I had to keep reminding myself. Tucked away in a dusty chest of old albums, I found what I was looking for: the original GIA certificate and appraisal for the sapphire ring, dated from 20 years ago. The detailed report, complete with a plot of the stone's inclusions, was as unique as a fingerprint. It was irrefutable proof of the ring's identity. A week after our tense lunch, Brenda called me. Her voice was thick with manufactured emotion. "Jessica, darling," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I feel like there's been some distance between us since your birthday. I want you to know how difficult this all is for me. Your father and I, we're not getting any younger. All we want is to see our children happy and successful." It was a classic Brenda maneuver. When logic failed, resort to emotional manipulation. She painted a picture of herself as a struggling, self-sacrificing mother trying her best in a difficult world. "Tiffany deserves this chance," she sniffled. "She has so much drive. You've always been so self-sufficient, so steady. She needs a little more help. Can't you find it in your heart to be happy for her?" The woman who had coldly informed me of the theft on my birthday was now crying crocodile tears, trying to guilt me into submission. The Jessica of 5 years ago might have faltered. But the Jessica of today, armed with a file folder full of facts, felt nothing but a cold, clarifying anger. "I need to see you and Tiffany," I said, my voice cutting through her performance. "In person, at Grandma's house, tomorrow evening." "At the house? Why?" she asked, the tears instantly drying up. "There are some estate matters we need to discuss," I said simply, and hung up before she could argue. The next evening, they arrived together, a united front of defiance. They walked into the living room, a room they still saw as theirs to command. I was sitting in Beatrice's favorite armchair, a place they had always seen as my grandmother's throne. A slim file lay on the coffee table in front of me. "All right, Jessica, what is this about?" Brenda began, crossing her arms. "This is all very dramatic." I didn't say a word. I opened the file and slid the first document across the table. A crystal-clear copy of the affidavit from Mr. Abernathy at the Gilded Cage. His statement detailing how Brenda Hamilton had sold him a specific sapphire ring and signed a document attesting to her ownership. Brenda paled. She stared at the paper, her mouth opening and closing silently. Tiffany snatched it up. "What is this? Who is this man?" "That is the man you and Mom called a private collector, with no paper trail," I said calmly. "He was kind enough to provide a sworn statement about the transaction." I then slid the second document across the table, the original GIA certificate from my grandmother's files. "And this," I continued, "is the certificate for that specific ring, proving it was the property of Beatrice Hamilton's estate. The serial number inscribed on the girdle of the stone is noted right there." Tiffany's face went from confusion to abject panic. She looked at the damning papers in her hand, then at her mother, who stood frozen, her mask of superiority completely shattered. For the first time, Brenda looked her age. She looked like a cornered animal. "Selling property that does not belong to you and attesting in writing that you are the legal owner is a crime, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "It's called fraudulent conversion. It's a felony. Mr. Vance has already drawn up the complaint. We have the bill of sale, the jeweler's testimony, the certificate of authenticity, and the bank records showing the deposit and subsequent tuition payments." Tiffany sank onto the sofa, the papers fluttering from her. Grasp, the bravado, the entitlement, the smug confidence, it all evaporated, leaving behind a scared, pale young woman who was finally understanding the reality of the situation. She stared at her mother, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and accusation. "Mom," she whispered, "you said it was fine. You said it was ours to use." The spell was broken. The powerful, all-knowing matriarch had been exposed as a common thief, and her golden child was now an accessory to a crime. The foundation of their world, built on a bedrock of lies and entitlement, had just crumbled into dust. The culmination of their arrogance was a dinner reservation at Aria, the city's most exclusive new restaurant. Brenda had booked it weeks in advance, a celebratory feast for Tiffany's official start on her journey to greatness. It wasn't just for the three of us. She had invited my father, my aunt and uncle, and a few close family friends. It was a public coronation, a victory lap designed to showcase her successful parenting and Tiffany's brilliant future, a future built on theft. Mr. Vance had advised against a public confrontation, favoring a quiet, legal strangulation. But I knew my mother. I knew her Achilles' heel was her public image, her carefully constructed reputation as a savvy, successful matriarch. Justice, for me, wasn't just about getting the money back. It was about exposing the truth in the very arena she valued most. I told Mr. Vance to be ready. He agreed to join me, arriving just after the main course was served, to act as an official witness. I arrived on time, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress. I was an island of calm in their sea of celebration. They were already seated, champagne glasses raised. My presence barely registered beyond a quick, tight-lipped smile from Brenda. She was still trying to maintain the fiction that everything was fine, that our last meeting had been a strange anomaly. The dinner was an agonizing performance. Brenda and Tiffany held court, laughing too loudly, accepting congratulations from the guests. My father, blissfully ignorant as always, beamed with pride. My aunt praised Brenda's resourcefulness. "It's amazing what you've done for the girls, Brenda. Truly." I ate little, watching them, feeling the ghost of my grandmother at my side. "Let her show her true colors," Beatrice's letter had said. And oh, she was. She was preening, basking in the glow of a fraudulent success. Just as dessert was being ordered, Mr. Arthur Vance walked into the private dining room. He was a distinguished man in a perfectly tailored suit, carrying a leather briefcase. His unexpected arrival caused an immediate lull in the conversation. "Mr. Vance," Brenda said, her voice strained, "what on earth are you doing here?" "Brenda," he said, his tone polite but firm, "Jessica asked me to join you. There is a pressing estate matter to discuss." I stood up, placing my napkin on the table. The entire table was looking at me now, their expressions a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "I'm sorry to interrupt everyone's celebration," I began, my voice clear and steady, carrying easily through the suddenly silent room. "But I'm afraid this entire evening is based on a lie." A collective gasp went through the room. My father started to say something, but I held up a hand. "As you all know, Mom and Tiffany recently made a great sacrifice to fund Tiffany's business school education," I continued, my gaze fixed on my mother. "They sold our grandmother Beatrice's sapphire ring. They told you, and me, that it was a necessary decision made for the good of the family." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. What they failed to mention is that the ring, along with the entirety of Grandma Beatrice's estate, does not belong to them. It was left, exclusively and entirely, to me. Mr. Vance stepped forward and opened his briefcase. He calmly placed a copy of Beatrice's final, legally binding will in the center of the table. "This is the last will and testament of Beatrice Hamilton," he announced. "It revokes all previous versions and names Jessica as the sole beneficiary. It is legally incontestable." The room erupted in whispers. My aunt picked up the document, her eyes scanning the page in disbelief. "But that's not all," I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing them in. "To sell an asset from an estate you do not own is a crime. It's fraud." I looked directly at Tiffany. "The money that paid for your tuition, Tiffany, was stolen." Then I delivered the final, devastating blow. I pulled the jeweler's affidavit and the GIA certificate from my clutch and placed them on the table next to the will. "This is a sworn statement from the jeweler who bought the ring from my mother, along with proof of her signature attesting to her ownership. It is evidence of a felony." The color drained from Brenda's face. She looked utterly exposed, her public image shredded before her very eyes. But the true climax wasn't her reaction, it was Tiffany's. Tiffany stared at the documents, then at the shocked faces of our family, then at the ostentatious dessert menu still in her hand. The reality of it all, the crime, the public humiliation, the lie she had lived and benefited from crashed down on her. Her eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of self-pity. They were tears of shame. She slowly stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. She looked at our mother, not with admiration, but with a dawning horror. "I can't," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't do this." She threw her napkin onto the table, turned, and walked out of the restaurant without a backward glance, leaving our mother sitting alone, exposed, and utterly defeated in the ruins of her own party. The aftermath of the dinner at Aria was swift and brutal. The family, armed with the undeniable truth, turned on Brenda with a quiet fury. Her reputation, the currency she valued above all else, was rendered worthless overnight. There was no longer any room for her manipulations or lies. Faced with irrefutable evidence and the threat of legal action from Mr. Vance, she capitulated completely. There was no trial. Brenda was terrified of further public humiliation. To avoid charges, she was forced to liquidate a significant portion of her own assets, stocks and bonds she had earmarked for her retirement. First, she had to pay back the full, appraised value of the ring to the estate. Then, she had to reimburse the estate for every dollar she had fraudulently spent since Beatrice's passing, from property taxes on the house to the bill for the disastrous celebration dinner. It was a financially crippling and deeply humbling process. She was left with a fraction of her former net worth, socially exiled from the family she had tried so hard to impress. A few weeks later, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Tiffany. She asked if we could meet. We met at a simple, quiet coffee shop, a world away from the glitzy restaurants her mother favored. She looked smaller, stripped of her usual bravado. She wore no makeup, and her clothes were simple jeans and a sweater. "I'm so sorry, Jessica," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't meet my eyes. "I knew it was wrong. I think I knew it all along, but I didn't want to see it. Mom, she makes you believe what she wants you to believe." "She does," I agreed quietly. "But at some point, we have to choose to see for ourselves." "I know," she said, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I withdrew from the business program. I used the money I had left from my old part-time job to pay back the first of the non-refundable deposits to the estate. It's not much, but it's a start." She finally looked up at me, her eyes full of a shame so profound it was almost painful to witness. "I was so jealous of you," she confessed. "Of you and Grandma. You had something real. All I had were things. Things Mom bought me to make me feel important. I don't want to be that person anymore." It wasn't a full absolution, but it was a beginning. I saw in her a genuine remorse and a desire to change. I didn't forget the years of entitlement, but I saw a flicker of the sister I might have had. I told her that rebuilding trust would take time, but that the door was not closed forever. I suggested she look into community college to find a path that was truly her own, not one paved with her mother's ambitions. For the first time, we had a real conversation, free from the toxic influence that had defined our relationship for so long. Mr. Vance finalized the transfer of the estate into my name. I officially moved into my grandmother's house, its familiar rooms a source of comfort and peace. And, a month later, a small, insured package arrived. Inside, nestled in velvet, was the sapphire ring. Mr. Vance, through a discreet legal negotiation, had arranged for the estate to buy it back from the jeweler, who was more than happy to be rid of a piece with such a dramatic history. I slipped it onto my finger. It felt like it had come home. It was no longer a symbol of betrayal, but a testament to my grandmother's wisdom, her foresight, and her enduring love. It was a reminder that truth, carefully preserved, is the most powerful asset of all. Standing in the quiet of my grandmother's garden, with the familiar weight of the ring on my hand, I felt a profound sense of peace. The conflict was resolved. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through the simple, unyielding power of the truth. My grandmother's legacy was secure, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely and utterly free.